Hey there, folks. It's Zach Elliott, and I've got a particular appointment, a designate of Barack Obama's that I really want to talk to you guys about because I just think that this is probably the worst of all of them, just for sheer ruthlessness. Um, there's a guy who he has appointed to be the director of national intelligence. So he's going to be overseeing all the various intelligence agencies and trying to get them to integrate properly. Now, there's no question that this guy is a highly intelligent human being. He was a Rhodes Scholar, etc. Um, but far more important than this, this guy has a record of ignoring direct commands from civilian authorities and lying to Congress. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about his period, Dennis Blair's, when he was in charge of, let's see, what was it? The Pacific, yes, Commander-in-Chief of United States Pacific Command. And I forget what the abbreviation for that is. But the important thing to know from this period of time is that he was responsible at the time when Indonesia was trying to suppress East Timor. In 1999, East Timor was given the option to vote up or down on whether or not they wished to have independence from Indonesia. Well, I mean, everybody knew that East Timor wanted independence, but the only reason why there was a vote is that so Indonesia could try to influence the vote. So the situation is, of course, that prior to the vote, Indonesia sends in its military, headed up by a guy called General Ruwanto, and he has all these militias at his disposal, and they just cause general mayhem, killing anybody who opposes them, anybody who wants East Timor for the East Timorians and not as part of Indonesia. At one point, he's implicated in this incredibly revolting massacre where he and a bunch of his militia members, this is Rwanto, go into a church and basically butcher everybody inside, men, women, children, clergy. At this point, Bill Clinton says enough is enough, and he calls up his Pacific guy who's in charge of his Pacific Command, Dennis Blair, and he says, look, we need you to go over and talk to this Wiranto and say that he needs to cut off these militias and stop what he's doing. So he meets with Wiranto, Blair does, but instead of delivering Clinton's message, he gives him an attaboy and says, hey, do you guys need anything in terms of U.S. aid? And of course, Wiranto, is thrilled to death with this. He thinks that now he's not doing anything wrong. He's got the United States on his side, and Blair even invites him to visit him at his house in Hawaii. Okay, so clearly, Wiranto thinks nothing is wrong, and he happily goes back to butchering people. So State Department finds out that Blair did not deliver the message as he was supposed to. And they tell him, you need to call Wiranto and tell him to cut off these militias. And he calls him again and again. He refuses to pass along the message and tell Wiranto that he is to stop. And this results in the butchering of thousands of people. And you can lay all of those thousands of people directly at the feet of this person who defied the orders of his commander-in-chief in order to let this guy go on massacring. And later, of course, because you got to cover it up, he lied to Congress about it. Let's read you a nice long quotation from that. This is Allan Nairn. He was on Democracy Now! He's an award-winning journalist, and this is what he had to say on the subject when he was on Democracy Now! I'll link to this as well. Well, in addition to supporting General Wiranto as he and his forces were massacring churches and killing more than 1,000 civilians in Timor in 1999, it now appears that Blair either lied to or willfully misled the U.S. Congress in testimony given before the Senate Armed Services Committee on March 3, 1999. In that testimony, Blair discussed the fall of Indonesian dictator Suharto. Suharto fell in May of 1998, and Admiral Blair, in his prepared statement submitted, made the following statement. Throughout this process, the Indonesian armed forces have played a difficult but generally positive role. While there were instances of individual or small unit violence against Indonesian citizens, military leadership firmly supported the Constitution. Moreover, the incidents of abuses, shootings, and kidnappings that were reported are now being investigated and the perpetrators punished. End quote. Now that is simply false. Almost every element of that statement is false, as anyone who is familiar with the situation in Indonesia at the time could tell you. It was not individual small units, but top Indonesian military officers, led by General Prabowo, who carried out Kopassus kidnappings of activists known as the Rose Team kidnappings. Not only did this involve senior officers, but those senior officers were U.S. trained. And the specific Kopassus intelligence units doing the kidnapping had a liaison with the U.S. military attaché at the embassy, and General Prabowo was a longtime U.S. protege. The senior officers of the Indonesian military instigated anti-Chinese riots in which their agents rampaged through the streets, burned houses, conducted mass rapes of Chinese and other women in the streets, a model of mayhem that was used 1 year later in occupied East Timor. They were also involved in the killings of protesters in the streets. And Admiral Blair tried to tell the Senate Armed Services Committee that the Indonesian military leadership had firmly supported the Constitution. Well, he had to know when he submitted that written statement that shortly before Suharto, as Suharto was falling, the Indonesian grassroots movement had announced a mass demonstration. And it was widely anticipated in Jakarta that this mass demonstration might draw 1 million people, and that it would lead to the downfall not only of the individual dictator, Suharto, but of the entire military establishment. So what did General Wiranto, the commander of the Indonesian Armed Forces, do? He told the organizers that if they held this demonstration, they would get a Tiananmen. They would be massacred by the military. And in fact, they called the demonstration off, with the result that Suharto, the individual, fell, but the military institution run by Wiranto remained intact and dominates within Indonesian politics to this day. So Admiral Blair was either lying or willfully deceiving the Senate Armed Services Committee on March 3, 1999. And then you have Bradley Simpson, author of Economists with Gun, Authoritarian Development and U.S.-Indonesian Relations, 1960 to 1968. He wrote this about Admiral Blair. Blair's apologetics for murder and torture by the Indonesian armed forces in East Timor, and his opposition to trials, international or otherwise, for the high-level perpetrators of mass violence, offers a sobering indication of the positions he is likely to take as Director of National Intelligence. President-elect Obama's choice suggests that he will resist, as Blair almost certainly will, demands for the prosecution of high-ranking Bush administration officials, much less lower-level employees in the Pentagon and Central Intelligence Agency for torture, rendition, and other crimes carried out in the name of the so-called War on Terror. Not a very promising picture. Obama has made, strong noises about, eliminating the torture regime. But if he chooses this person, what is that saying about how he feels about the rule of law? What does that say about, how he feels about the rights of oppressed minority populations? I think it's a very mixed message, and I think this guy is a butcher. I think this guy is deceitful. I think this guy is extremely dangerous, especially if we're going to put him in charge of the most secretive aspect of our country. And he's already demonstrated that he has absolute contempt for civilian authority. So I think this is a very important appointment, and whether it goes through or not, I think it casts an enormous doubts on Obama's judgment that he would select somebody like this, somebody with this kind of record, this kind of, I keep saying it again and again, this kind of contempt for, civilian rule. So, I don't know. You can certainly feel free to disagree with me on this one. So, but I'd really be interested in your arguments. Anyway, this is Zach at Feel Free to Argue. Take care, everybody.